Hi everybody, welcome to Bello's. My name's Catherine and today we're going to be making this card, which I am calling the Fairy Foragers Enchanted Garden. Let's talk about the supplies that we'll need to get started. Beginning with the Lavinia Stamps latest collection, today I'm going to be using the Lucky Clover Mini, which is LAV 889. The Inner Wooden Door, which is LAV 880. The Moss Cap Cluster, which is LAV 883. The Arch of Angels, which is LAV 874. And we'll also be using the Wild Leaf Corner, which is LAV 885. From previous releases, I will be using the Fairy Foragers LAV 498, the Meadow Mushroom, which is LAV 561. We'll be using the Tiny Flowers or Berries from the Foliage set, which is LAV 679. And then finally, we'll be using the Moss Stones from LAV 857 Forest Moss. We'll be using a variety of ink pads for this project. So let's start with the Versafine Clair and Nocturne. I have Versafine Clair Bally Blue, Twilight, Glamorous, Grass Green, and finally, Spruce. For Elements inks, I will be using Dark Denim, Olive, and Lime Punch. We'll need a couple of blending brushes for the Elements inks. And in addition to that, I have a few markers and pens. So I have the silver pen from Signo Uniball. I have a gray watercolor pencil that I'll be using today. I have some Sweet Poppy watercolor blending brushes, and I have picked out only a few colors to use today. So I'm going to be using the Ice Gray, the Azure, and the Teal, and this is from set 2. I'll also be using the watercolor blending brush. I have my Micron fine tip pen in case I need to touch anything up. I always keep that on hand. And then finally, I have 2 Posca pens. I have the white and the light blue glitter. A box to spray. I also have some paper towels to mop up any extra liquid that's running off of there, because that can get quite messy and it might make it take a little bit longer to dry, so I like to get it off the edges. I'll be using Blueberry Dinkles Pink and then the Lime Divine. You know those are my favorite colors. We'll also need a water mister to spread out those inks when we get to that point. For our cardstock supplies, I am using a piece of multivarious cardstock, and I have cut this down to 4 3/4 by 6 3/4. I have a piece of teal cardstock because I think it looks really great with the background of the card we're making today, and that is cut into a piece that is 5 by 7 inches. And then I have another piece of multivarious cardstock that I have cut into 10 by 7, and it's folded in half to make a 7 by 5 card. We'll be using the Lavinia masking sheets, and I have pre-stamped and cut out the archway. And then finally, a couple of new items that I've added to my personal collection, which I'm really excited to share with you today, is the Misty. This has been on my list for a very long time. So starting with our piece of multivarious cardstock, 4 3/4 by 6 3/4 inches, I'm going to put it into an old box, and I've lined it with some extra packing paper that I am reusing for this purpose. I also have my Dinkles in pink, lime divine, and blueberry. And I'm going to sprinkle them with the pink in this bottom right corner. I'll use the green in the left corner and then the blue across the top. And then we'll activate it with our water. Now, when you're doing this part of your project, you might want to change from your white t-shirt to a black shirt, because I can tell you from experience that I have ruined 3 white shirts this year. So before I began today, I did run upstairs to change and put on an old shirt. Some people might craft with an apron. I'm going to highly recommend that for projects that you're using with Dinkles. And we'll put the blue across the top. Give it a generous amount. And I can always come back in and add more later if I need to, but I'm hoping I won't need to. So now I have my spritzer. I'm going to give it a couple of sprays, see how that looks. And maybe a little more just to kind of let it run around and see how that moves on the paper. You can use some paper towels to mop up any extra, but I really don't want to take away too much of the color, so I'm just going to dab it at the corners and the edges so I don't get a lot of pooling there. Okay. All right, and we'll give that some time to dry, and I'll be back. Now my card base has had some time to dry, so I'm going to stamp the Arch of Angels onto my cardstock using my new Misty by My Sweet Petunia. I really like some of the features that the Misty has as a stamp positioner. It does come with a package of papers so that you can see what you're stamping, and that's really handy if you're trying to place a greeting inside of a card. But we won't be using that today because I think this is all we're going to need. So I'm going to use the foam mat because that will give me a little bit of cushion, and you'll want to use the foam mat if you're using a clear stamp with that. So I'm going to use the magnet to hold it in place. One of the things I really like about the Misty is that I can wedge my cardstock into this corner. So if I need to re-stamp anything and the cardstock adjusts a little bit, all I have to do is just push it right back into that corner. And because it's on the corner opposite the hinge, I'm able to get a little bit of better pressure there. So I'm going to take my Arch of Angels and I want to place it where there's lots of green in that doorway because I really liked the look of that in my original piece. So I'm going to put that just about, maybe a little bit off center. And then I'll close it to pick up that stamp. Open it back up again, and I'm going to be stamping in the Twilight. Looks like we got a little bit on the edge there, so I'm going to wipe it off with my chamois towel, just so I don't get any of that transfer onto my project. And here we go. All right, that's a pretty perfect stamp, and I'm happy with that, so I'm going to leave that there. Project is going to be to stamp the inner wooden door, so I'm simply going to place that right over my pre-stamped image. And this is the best part of using a stamp platform, wouldn't you agree? You can really line things up and get them exactly where you want them. So I'm going to place that right there and just close the Misty to pick up that stamp. And it is ready to ink up. And once again, I'm using the Twilight. Just give it a little firm pressure. And that looks pretty perfect. I'm going to come back in to stamp the moss cap cluster. Now once again, I can push that right into the corner, but I think I'm going to need to space my cards so that the mushrooms will be off the edge of the card a little bit. So this is when the grid paper comes in handy, because we'll put that right into the corner. And I'm going to give myself about a 1/2 inch, maybe a 1/2 inch from the right side and a 1/2 inch from the bottom. I'll be using the magnet to hold it in place. And these are pretty strong magnets, but you can also use some removable tape like washi tape or painter's tape if you want to make that a little bit more secure. But I'm pretty comfortable with how secure that's going to be. So I'm going to place my mushrooms right at the bottom of my card, and once again close the lid to pick that up, and then we'll ink it up in Twilight and see how that comes out. It's really warm today, so I have the window open, and I'm not sure if you can hear the birds chirping out back, but we have loads of cardinals in the woods behind the house, and so they're making a little bit of an appearance today. The next step we're going to do is stamp the wild leaf corner, and I'm going to place that down onto my card. Now I like to place this stamp just a little bit off the card so that the stamped image comes all the way to the edge, and that also is giving me just a little bit of space to stamp something else between the door and the corner. So the nice thing about these is that you can adjust them for the size of your card. So I'm going to close the MISTI to pick up that stamp. And for this stamp, I'm going to be using the Versafine Clair Bally Blue, which is one of the new release colors, and I absolutely love it. So we'll just get that all inked up right there. And on top of the lime Dinkles, it's going to make a little bit more of a greenish hue than a blue. So here we go. I'll just give that a little bit of pressure. And there's my corner. I went ahead and tore myself a little piece of paper to make the ground. And I'm going to come back in with my Elements ink in olive and my blending brush and just ground my doorway. I just want to darken up the ground below that door just a tad. My next step will be to stamp the smaller rock from the Forest Moss collection with the Versafine Clair and Nocturne, and I'm going to put just a few to the left and maybe a couple down near my mushroom cluster. So I'll ink that up. The next stamp I'm going to use is the miniature Meadow Mushrooms, and I'm going to stamp those also in Nocturne. So we'll have those growing out behind our little moss-covered rocks. Maybe a couple down here. All right, I don't love how that turned out, so I'm going to mask that up just a little bit. There is no mistake in stamping that you can't cover up later. So I'll just add another rock at the bottom of those, and there we go. Now that looks natural. Now I think it's time to come in and paint the doorway. My next step is going to be to come back in with my Sweet Poppy watercolor brush pens, and I'm just going to simply paint in the doorway using a combination of the gray and the medium and dark blue. So in order to get the effect that I like, I'm going to add a little bit of paint from the pen to my stamp block and just water it down a little bit with my blending pen. I've added the dark blue to the inside of my archway, and now I'm going to come back with my lighter blue and just fill in the outside of that using the same technique. So I'll spread lots of the paint onto my stamp block and then pick it up with my blending pen. Pretty happy with how that looks, but now I do want to actually come back in with my gray and darken up the stairwell a little bit. Using the Lavinia masking sheets, I have stamped and cut out the doorway, and as you can see, it's been used previously, so the nice thing about this is that you can put them back onto the backing and they're good to reuse a few more times. So this particular mask I've used twice. This is the third time I'm going to be using it. So I'm going to use the Lucky Clover from the latest Lavinia release, and I'm going to begin by stamping it with the Versafine Clair Grass more towards the outside of the archway, and then as I get closer to the middle, I'm going to come back in with a little bit of a darker ink. So now that I have that completed in the grass green, I've gone completely around my archway, and I'm also trying to avoid these little mushrooms. I'm going to make the clover seem as though it's coming off from the side. All right, I'm going to move on to the Lavinia foliage set, and I'm going to use the small flower with some of the Glamorous to get that bright pink. Let's pull that off and see how that looks. For the final bit of stamping on this card, I'm going to bring my Misty back in because I really want to make sure I get a good solid image with my fairy foragers, and I'm not sure that I'm going to use all of them. So let's place them on the card and get a feel for how they look. I really like this little one, and I think I'm going to put her, well, maybe down here. I think we'll put her in the, down here in these little vines, and I'll put these two flying over the doorway. There we go. So I'm only going to use 3 out of the 4 of those. So we'll close our Misty to pick up those stamps. And because the card is already fairly dark, I'm going to use Nocturne to ink up the fairies. So give each of them lots of ink. Give it a good press. And let's see how they came out. And I think they could be a little bit darker, so let's go right back in and add a little more. There we go. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out the second time around. Before I add the final touches with my Posca pens and my glitter pens, I want to come back in and darken up the edges around the top of my card a little bit. And I really like the look that I get when I use the lime punch over that Versafine Clair on the bottom. So let's start with the bottom corner, and we're just going to blend in some of these element inks. And I'm going to add a little bit just to the stems of my mushrooms. really would like all the mushrooms to be one color in this cluster, so I'm going to use my light blue sparkle Posca pen to fill those in. I'm going to add a little bit to these little ones at the bottom. And just come back in and add a little bit of sparkle to the wings on my fairies. And just give it a little bit of definition away from those stones she's in front of. Do the same up here. As you can see, my watercolor pencil did not work out quite as well as I hoped it would to color in the moss-covered stones. So I've decided to come back in with my watercolor brush pen and just go over those a little bit to darken them up. That's a little more of the effect that I was looking for. I'll just add a little bit into my fairy to give her a little shadow. And I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. So let's get all our supplies together to complete our card. This week I'm going to assemble my card using the Sweet Petunia glue press. So this is a new product for me. It comes with a stand to hold the glue gun, and it keeps the glue all the way down at the tip of the bottle so that you don't have to prime it, and it's always ready to go. The cap has a little needle inside of it that fits right into that tip and keeps it from clogging when it's not in use, and when you are using it, it fits right in the stand. How convenient is that? I have been using this all week, and I haven't capped it at all, and I haven't had a problem with it. You might find that after it rests for a few days inside the well, when you take it off, there'll be a little bit of dried glue at the end, and you just pick that off and it's really ready to go. So I'm going to start with my main card panel here, and I'm just going to add lots of glue to make sure I get a good seal. And you know, I like to go all the way around the edges and then add a little bit in the middle for some extra strong holding. I'm just going to press it down and make sure I get a good stick. Turn it over and do the back. There we go, and there's our card, our finished card. I really like the look of that teal and how it complements the other colors in my card. I think it really brings out the lime green, and you can see the sparkle on the fairy wings and a little bit from the mushrooms. I hope you like my project today. If you give it a try, you can share your creations in our Facebook groups. We have two. We have Bello's Designs Lounge, which is primarily for Lavinia products, and Bello's a la carte for other products that Bello's sells. Thanks for watching today. See you soon.